Amidst the turmoil of events, do not lose your presence of mind. The counterbalance strategy. In the heat of battle, the mind tends to lose its balance. Too many things confront you at the same time. Unexpected setbacks, doubts, and criticisms from your own allies. There's a danger of responding emotionally, with fear, depression, or frustration. It is vital to keep your presence of mind, maintaining your mental powers whatever the circumstances. You must actively resist the emotional pull of the moment, staying decisive, confident, and aggressive no matter what hits you. Make the mind tougher by exposing it to adversity. Learn to detach yourself from the chaos of the battlefield. Let others lose their heads. Your presence of mind will steer you clear of their influence and keep you on course. Presence of mind must play a great role in war, the domain of the unexpected, since it is nothing but an increased capacity of dealing with the unexpected. We admire presence of mind in an apt repartee, as we admire quick thinking in the face of danger. The expression presence of mind precisely conveys the speed and immediacy of the help provided by the intellect. On War, Karl von Clausewitz, 1780 to 1831. The hyper-aggressive tactic. Vice Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson, 1758 to 1805, had been through it all. He had lost his right eye in the Siege of Calvi and his right arm in the Battle of Teneriffe in 1797. And he had thwarted Napoleon's Egyptian campaign by defeating his navy at the Battle of the Nile the following year. But none of his tribulations and triumphs prepared him for the problems he faced from his own colleagues in the British Navy, as they prepared to go to war against Denmark in February 1801. Nelson, England's most glorious war hero, was the obvious choice to lead the fleet. Instead, the Admiralty chose Sir Hyde Parker, with Nelson his second in command. This war was a delicate business. It was intended to force the disobedient Danes to comply with a British-led embargo on the shipping of military goods to France. The fiery Nelson was prone to lose his cool. He hated Napoleon, and if he went too far against the Danes, he would produce a diplomatic fiasco. Sir Hyde was an older, more stable, even-tempered man who would do the job and nothing more. More life might trickle out of men through thought than through a gaping wound. Thomas Hardy, 1840 to 1928.
At last, on March 11, the British fleet set sail. Instead of heading for Copenhagen, however, Parker anchored well to the north of the city's harbor and called a meeting of his captains. According to intelligence reports, he explained, the Danes had prepared elaborate defenses for Copenhagen, boats anchored in the harbor, forts to the north and south, and mobile artillery batteries could blast the British out of the water. How to fight this artillery without terrible losses? Also, pilots knew the waters around Copenhagen, reported that they were treacherous, places of sandbars and tricky winds. Navigating these dangers under bombardment would be harrowing. With all of these difficulties, perhaps it was best to wait for the Danes to leave harbor and then fight them in open sea. Nelson struggled to control himself. Finally, he let loose, pacing the room, the stub of his lost arm jerking as he spoke. No war, he said, had ever been won by waiting. The Danish defenses looked formidable to those who are children at war. But he had worked out a strategy weeks earlier. He would attack from the south, the easier approach, while Parker and a reserve force would stay to the city's north. Nelson would use his mobility to take out the Danish guns. He had studied the maps. Sandbars were no threat. As for the wind, aggressive action was more important than fretting over wind. Nelson's speech energized Parker's captains. He was by far their most successful leader, and his confidence was catching. Even Sir Hyde was impressed, and the plan was approved. So Grant was alone. His most trusted subordinates besought him to change his plans, while his superiors were astounded at his temerity and strove to interfere. soldiers of reputation and civilians in high places condemned in advance a campaign that seemed to them as hopeless as it was unprecedented. If he failed, the country would concur with the government and the generals. Grant knew all this and appreciated his danger, but was as invulnerable to the apprehensions of ambition as to the entreaties of friendship, or the anxieties even of patriotism. That quiet confidence in himself which never forsook him, and which amounted indeed almost to a feeling of fate, was uninterrupted. Having once determined in a matter that required irreversible decision, he never reversed or even misgave, but was steadily loyal to himself and his plans. This absolute and implicit faith was, however, as far as possible from conceit or enthusiasm. It was simply a consciousness, or a conviction rather, that brought the very strength it believed in, which was itself strength, and which inspired others with a trust in him, because he was able thus to trust himself. Military History of Ulysses S. Grant, Adam Badeau, 1868. The next morning, Nelson's line of ships advanced on Copenhagen, and the battle began. The Danish guns, firing on the British at close range, took a fierce toll. Nelson paced the deck of his flagship, HMS Elephant, urging his men on. He was in an excited, almost ecstatic state. A shot through the mainmast nearly hit him. "It is warm work, and this day may be the last to any of us at any moment," he told a colonel, a little shaken up by the blast. "But mark you, I would not be elsewhere for thousands." Parker followed the battle from his position to the north. He now regretted agreeing to Nelson's plan. He was responsible for the campaign, and a defeat here could ruin his career. After 4 hours of back-and-forth bombardment, he had seen enough. The fleet had taken a beating and had gained no advantage. Nelson never knew when to quit. He decided it was time to hoist signal flag 39, the order to withdraw. The first ships to see it were to acknowledge it and pass the signal on down the line. Once acknowledged, there was nothing else to do but retreat. The battle was over. On board the Elephant, a lieutenant told Nelson about the signal. The vice admiral ignored it. Continuing to pound the Danish defenses, he eventually called to an officer, "Is number 16 still hoisted?" Number 16 was his own flag. It meant engage the enemy more closely. The officer confirmed that the flag was still flying. "Mind you keep it so," Nelson told him. A few minutes later, Parker's signal still flapping in the breeze, Nelson turned to his flag captain. "You know, Foley, I only have one eye. I have a right to be blind sometimes." And raising his telescope to his blind eye, he calmly remarked, "I really do not see the signal." Torn between obeying Parker and obeying Nelson, the fleet captains chose Nelson. They would risk their careers along with his. But soon the Danish defenses started to crack. Some of the ships anchored in the harbor surrendered, and the firing of the guns began to slow. Less than an hour after Parker's signal to stop the battle, the Danes surrendered. The next day, Parker perfunctorily congratulated Nelson on the victory. He did not mention his subordinate's disobedience. He was hoping the whole affair, including his own lack of courage, would be quietly forgotten. Interpretation. When the Admiralty put its faith in Sir Hyde, it made a classical military error. It entrusted the waging of a war to a man who is careful and methodical. These men may seem calm, even strong in times of peace, but their self-control often hides weakness. The reason they think things through so carefully is that they're terrified of making a mistake and of what that might mean for them and their career. This doesn't come out until they are tested in battle. Suddenly, they cannot make a decision. They see problems everywhere and defeat in the smallest setback. They hang back not out of patience, but out of fear. Often these moments of hesitation spell their doom. There once was a man who may be called the generalissimo of robbers and who went by the name of Hakamadare. He had a strong mind and a powerful build. He was swift of foot, quick with his hands, wise in thinking and plotting. Altogether, there was no one who could compare with him. His business was to rob people of their possessions when they were off guard. Once, around the 10th month of a year, he needed clothing and decided to get hold of some. He went to prospective spots and walked about looking. About midnight, when people had gone to sleep and were quiet, under a somewhat blurry moon, he saw a man dressed in abundant clothes sauntering about on a boulevard. The man, with his trouser skirt tucked up with strings perhaps, and in a formal hunting robe which gently covered his body, was playing the flute. Alone, apparently no hurry to go to any particular place. Wow, here's a fellow who's shown up just to give me his clothes, Hakamadari thought. Normally, he would have gleefully run up and beaten his quarry down and robbed him of his clothes. But this time, unaccountably, he felt something fearsome about the man, so he followed him for a couple of 100 yards. The man himself didn't think, "Somebody is following me." On the contrary, he continued to play the flute with what appeared to be greater calm. "Give him a try," Hakamadari said to himself, and ran up close to the man, making as much clatter as he could with his feet. The man, however, didn't seem the least disturbed. He simply turned to look, still playing the flute. It wasn't possible to jump on him. Hakamadari ran off. Hakamadari tried similar approaches a number of times, but the man remained utterly unperturbed. He realized he was dealing with an unusual fellow. When they had covered 1,000 yards, though, Hakamadari decided he couldn't continue like this, drew his sword, and ran up to him. This time, the man stopped playing the flute and turning said, "What in the world are you doing?" Hakamadari couldn't have been struck with greater fear even if a demon or a god had run up to attack him when he was walking alone. For some unaccountable reason, he lost both heart and courage. Overcome with deathly fear and despite himself, he fell on his knees and hands. "What are you doing?" the man repeated. Hakamadari felt he couldn't escape even if he tried. "I'm trying to rob you," he blurted out. "My name is Hakamadari. I've heard there's a man about with that name, yes. A dangerous, unusual fellow, I'm told." Then he simply said to Hakamadari, "Come with me," and continued on his way, playing the flute again. Terrified that he was dealing with no ordinary human being, and as if possessed by a demon or a god, Hakamadari followed the man, completely mystified. Eventually, the man walked into a gate behind which was a large house. He stepped inside from the veranda after removing his shoes. While Hakamadari was thinking he must be the master of the house, he came back and summoned him. As he gave him a robe of thick cotton cloth, he said, "If you need something like this in the future, just come and tell me. If you jump on somebody who doesn't know your intentions, you may get hurt." Afterward, it occurred to Hakamadari that the house belonged to Governor of Setsu, Fujiwara de Yasamasa. Later, when he was arrested, he is known to have observed, "He was such an unusually weird, terrifying man." Yasamasa was not a warrior by family tradition, because he was a son of Munitada. Yet he was not the least inferior to anyone who was a warrior by family tradition. He had a strong mind, was quick with his hands, and had tremendous strength. He was also subtle in thinking and plotting. So even the imperial court did not feel insecure in employing him in the way of the warrior. As a result, the whole world greatly feared him and was intimidated by him. Legends of the Samurai, Hiraki Sato, 1995.
Lord Nelson operated according to the opposite principle. Slight of build, with a delicate constitution, he compensated for his physical weakness with fierce determination. He forced himself to be more resolute than anyone around him. The moment he entered battle, he ratcheted up his aggressive impulses. Where other sea lords worried about casualties, the wind, changes in the enemy's formation, he concentrated on his plan. Before battle, no one strategized or studied his opponent more thoroughly. That knowledge helped Nelson to sense when the enemy was ready to crumble. But once the engagement began, hesitation and carefulness were dropped. Presence of mind is a kind of counterbalance to mental weakness, to our tendency to get emotional and lose perspective in the heat of battle. Our greatest weakness is losing heart, doubting ourselves, becoming unnecessarily cautious. Being more careful is not what we need. That is just a screen for our fear of conflict and of making a mistake. What we need is double the resolve, an intensification of confidence. That will serve as a counterbalance. In moments of turmoil and trouble, you must force yourself to be more determined. Call up the aggressive energy you need to overcome caution and inertia. Any mistakes you make, you can rectify with more energetic action still. Save your carefulness for the hours of preparation. But once the fighting begins, empty your mind of doubts. Ignore those who quail at any setback and call for retreat. Find joy in attack mode. Momentum will carry you through. The senses make a more vivid impression on the mind than systematic thought. Even the man who planned the operation and now sees it being carried out may well lose confidence in his earlier judgment. War has a way of masking the stage with scenery crudely daubed with fearsome apparitions. Once this is cleared away and the horizon becomes unobstructed, developments will confirm his earlier convictions. This is one of the great chasms between planning and execution. Karl von Clausewitz on War, 1780 to 1831. The detached Buddha tactic. Watching the movie director Alfred Hitchcock at work on a film set was often quite a surprise to those seeing it for the first time. Most filmmakers are wound-up balls of energy, yelling at the crew and barking out orders, but Hitchcock would sit in his chair, sometimes dozing or at least with his eyes half closed. On the set of Strangers on a Train, made in 1951, the actor Farley Granger thought Hitchcock's behavior meant he was angry or upset, and asked him if anything was wrong. "Oh, I'm so bored," Hitchcock replied sleepily. The crew's complaints and actors' tantrums, nothing fazed him. He would just yawn, shift in his chair, and ignore the problem. "Hitchcock didn't seem to direct us at all," said the actress Margaret Lockwood. "He was a dozing, nodding Buddha with an enigmatic smile on his face." It was hard for Hitchcock's colleagues to understand how a man doing such stressful work could stay so calm and detached. Some thought it was part of his character, that there was something inherently cold-blooded about him. Others thought it a gimmick, a put-on. Few suspected the truth. Before the filmmaking had even begun, Hitchcock would have prepared for it with such intense attention to detail that nothing could go wrong. He was completely in control. No temperamental actress, no panicky art director, no meddling producer could upset him or interfere with his plans. Feeling such absolute security in what he had set up, he could afford to lay back and fall asleep. Hitchcock's process began with a storyline, whether from a novel or an idea of his own. As if he had a movie projector in his head, he would begin to visualize the film. Next, he would start meeting with a writer, who would soon realize that this job was unlike any other. Instead of taking some producer's half-baked idea and turning it into a screenplay, the writer was simply there to put on paper the dream trapped in Hitchcock's mind. He or she would add flesh and bones to the characters and would of course write the dialogue, but not much else. When Hitchcock sat down with the writer Samuel Taylor for the first script meeting on the movie Vertigo, 1958, his descriptions of several scenes were so vivid, so intense, that the experiences seemed almost to have been real, or maybe something he had dreamed. This completeness of vision foreclosed creative conflict. As Taylor soon realized, although he was writing the script, it would remain a Hitchcock creation. Once the screenplay was finished, Hitchcock would transform it into an elaborate shooting script. Blocking, camera positions, lighting, and set dimensions were spelled out in detailed notes. Most directors leave themselves some latitude, shooting scenes from several angles, for example, to give the film editor options to work with later on. Not Hitchcock. He essentially edited the entire film in the shooting script. He knew exactly what he wanted and wrote it down. If a producer or actor tried to add or change a scene, Hitchcock was outwardly pleasant. He could afford to pretend to listen, but inside, he was totally unmoved. Nothing was left to chance. For the building of the sets, quite elaborate in a movie like Rear Window, Hitchcock would present the production designer with precise blueprints, floor plans, incredibly detailed lists of props. He supervised every aspect of set construction. He was particularly attentive to the clothes of his leading actresses. According to Edith Head, costumer on many Hitchcock movies, including Dial M for Murder in 1954, quote, "There was a reason for every color, every style, and he was absolutely certain about everything he settled on. For one scene, he saw Grace Kelly in pale green, for another in white chiffon, for another in gold.
He was really putting a dream together in the studio. When the actress Kim Novak refused to wear a gray suit in Vertigo because she felt it made her look washed out, Hitchcock told her he wanted her to look like a woman of mystery who had just stepped out of the San Francisco fog. How could she argue with that? She wore the suit. Hitchcock's actors found working with him strange, yet pleasant. Some of Hollywood's best, Joseph Cotten, Grace Kelly, Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, said that he was the easiest director to work for. His nonchalance was catching, and since his films were so carefully staged as not to depend on the actor's performance in any particular scene, they could relax. Everything went like clockwork. As James Stewart told the cast of The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1956, quote, "We're in the hands of an expert here. You can lean on him. Just do everything he tells you and the whole thing will be okay." As Hitchcock sat calmly on the set, apparently half asleep, the cast and crew could see only the small part each one played. They had no idea how everything fit into his vision. When Taylor saw Vertigo for the first time, it was like seeing another man's dream. The film neatly duplicated the vision Hitchcock had expressed to him many months before. Interpretation. The first film Hitchcock directed was The Pleasure Garden, a silent he made in 1925. The production went wrong in every conceivable way. Hitchcock hated chaos and disorder, unexpected events, panicky crew members, and any loss of control made him miserable. From that point on, he decided he would treat filmmaking like a military operation. He would give his producers, actors, and crew no room to mess up what he wanted to create. He taught himself every aspect of film production: set design, lighting, the technicalities of cameras and lenses, editing, sound. He ran every stage of the film's making. No shadow could fall between the planning and the execution. Establishing control in advance the way Hitchcock did might not seem like presence of mind, but it actually takes that quality to its zenith. It means entering battle, in Hitchcock's case, a film shoot, feeling calm and ready. Setbacks may come, but you will have foreseen them and thought of alternatives, and you're ready to respond. Your mind will never go blank when it is that well prepared. When your colleagues barrage you with doubts, anxious questions, and slipshod ideas, you may nod and pretend to listen, but really you're ignoring them. You've outthought them in advance. And your relaxed manner will prove contagious to other people, making them easier to manage in turn. It is easy to be overwhelmed by everything that faces you in battle, where so many people are asking or telling you what to do. So many vital matters press in on you that you can lose sight of your goals and plans. Suddenly you can't see the forest for the trees. Understand, presence of mind is the ability to detach yourself from all that, to see the whole battlefield, the whole picture with clarity. All great generals have this quality. And what gives you that mental distance is preparation, mastering the details beforehand. Let people think your Buddha-like detachment comes from some mysterious source. The less they understand you, the better. For the love of God, pull yourself together and do not look at things so darkly. The first step backwards makes a poor impression in the army. The second step is dangerous, and the third becomes fatal. Frederick the Great, 1712 to 1786. Letter to a General.